Okay, well, hello, welcome everybody. I want to thank you all for being here. My name is Rhiannon Carlisle. I am with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Just a little background about us. We are a nonprofit organization focusing on educating the public, supporting the community, and increasing civic engagement, all of this to help protect our state's natural legacy. Real quick, just some technical things. All of you guys are muted and will have your cameras off, so we cannot see or hear you. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can go ahead and put them either in the Q&A or in the chat box. I will be monitoring these throughout, and at the end of the presentation, we will go ahead and answer all of the questions. This webinar is being recorded. We do like to post these videos to our website and to our YouTube page. So anyone who couldn't attend can go ahead and watch it, or if you guys would like, you can rewatch it. Also, at the end of the presentation, there'll be a quick 1-minute, 3-question poll that I will send out. If you guys could please just stick around and answer this, it's really quick. It helps us gauge our outreach and just gives us some feedback about these webinars. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get going. Joining us today, we have Katie Pekarek. She's an Associate Extension Educator through the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. I'm going to let her go more in depth about herself and her background. So Katie, you can go ahead and take it away.
Sure. I'm really excited to be here. It's fun watching these participant names come up because there's a lot of you I know from different facets of life here. I am an extension educator in the School of Natural Resources with the University of Nebraska. By training, I'm a biological and agricultural engineer, and I've worked in consulting in the urban areas and agriculture as well. I've been with the university for the last 12 years, working predominantly with water quality. And then I also farm in Butler County with my husband, and we raise predominantly vegetable crops, but also a little bit of row crops. So I tend to dance this line of urban agriculture, water quality producer, user of water, and I feel very at home in the water quality world. Now, I'm going to share some information with you today. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen and get that PowerPoint up. So today we're going to focus on talking about water quality, and we're really going to look at 3 main things with a 4th one if we have time. When we talk about Nebraska's water quality, there's about 1 million things going on. So to summarize it in an hour is actually quite the daunting task to do without making it an overwhelming sort of a thing. So today we're going to talk about monitoring and the state of our water quality, take a look at what's actually going on in water quality in Nebraska. We're going to look at some of the implications of those water quality impairments, and then we're going to take a look at how Nebraska is taking action, how we manage water quality, what are the sort of things we do. And if we've got time at the end, I want to show you a few cool projects. So with that, we're going to start with monitoring and managing water quality. Over history, we've had 2 basic types of water quality that we look at. One is point source, and we call that point source pollution. Basically, it means I can point to the problem and I know where it is. It was a really big thing in the 1960s and 70s. We had a Cuyahoga River fire that was all the result of point source pollution. It's basically dirty water coming out of a pipe. In that case, it was coming out of factories, but it could also come out of oil or a specific leak, and you know where it's at. And since the 1970s and the inception of the Clean Water Act, we've really moved away from point source as the vast majority of our pollution sources in water, and now it's non-point source. And so here I show a picture of an agricultural crop, but really what it is non-point source pollution means that there is pollution, little bits and pieces lying all over the ground. So in a city, it might be gas, it might be oil, it might be fertilizer on our lawns. In agriculture, it could be the products that we put on the fields. But when the water comes and it picks that up and it carries it into a surface water body like a lake or a stream, or when it carries it down through the ground to our groundwater, we call that non-point source pollution. So that is wholly and utterly what I work with. Part of my role currently is actually as a liaison to our 319 program, and that's the section 319 of the Clean Water Act. But basically what it means is that I work as a go-between between the university and our state agency, the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, to help work on non-point source pollution. So that takes me into how do we monitor surface water quality in Nebraska? And we do something called ambient monitoring. Basically what that means is that every stream and lake, every surface water body in Nebraska has a designation of how it should be used. So in some cases, it's primary contact. You know, I want to go swimming, I want to go boating, I want to go kayaking. In some cases, it might be livestock, it might be irrigation. There's all sorts of different uses that we designate our surface water for. And once we designate a surface water body for a specific use, then we can go ahead and say, okay, we have certain standards of how much of a pollutant can be within that water body. So that's why we call it ambient monitoring. This ambient program is led by the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, formerly the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality. They had a name change in the last couple of years, so if it sounds funny or different, it is. But basically what we do is we have something called ambient stream monitoring. So we have 100 different sites. Some of them are on the same stream, some of them aren't. And those are monitored monthly, all year round for certain things. From May through September, they're monitored monthly for pesticides. And the reason for that is because that's the primary use season of pesticides. And then they're monitored quarterly for metals. And some of that can be these different timeframes that we monitor for things is partially because there's a cost associated with all the monitoring, and there's a certain budget to work within. But some of it is because of the time of use of a certain product. And the other portion that determines how frequently the monitoring happens is basically how quickly you would see a change, positive or negative. So then the next program we have is something called Ambient Leg Monitoring, very similar to the stream monitoring, but it includes monitoring monthly from May through September at 45 states all across 45 sites all across the state. And then the final thing that most people are more likely to see, you might actually see these people out doing their work, is the public beach monitoring. And so we don't always think of Nebraska as having beaches, but basically any public recreation area where there is a beach that someone could be swimming at will have this public beach monitoring May through September when we expect people to be in the water. And primarily what they're looking for there is E. coli, because if you ingest E. coli, it's a big stomach issue, and then harmful algal blooms, which have all sorts of implications, both human health and animal health. So then on top of that, we have something called basin rotation monitoring. And this takes place at 35 to 45 sites annually. And you'll see these 6 different areas. Basically, in each year, we go to one of those sets of sites and we monitor intensely at those 35 to 45 sites. So sometimes you have a stream like in the lower Platte Basin. The last time we were in there, we monitored some extra times in the Shell Creek watershed because we were watching for atrazine to go down, and that stream actually improved, but we wouldn't have known that if we didn't do that extra step of monitoring. Other times we have a problem spot and we want to monitor more because we want to watch what's happening with that. In any case, it's a discussion that goes on between multiple programs every year. And it's basically like this freedom to monitor for things that may be emerging problems or maybe things that you just want to look at in more depth. So then all of that information from the lakes and the streams goes into something called the Integrative Report. And this is something that's put together every 2 years. The NDEE, Department of Environment and Energy in Nebraska, is in charge of putting that report together. And they take all of that data and they make this nice, pretty map. And I'm a big fan of maps because I think a picture tells a good story. So on here, all the lines are streams, all the dots are lakes. The streams that are in red are streams that are impaired, meaning that they have something that makes it that their water quality is not good enough to use what you wanted it for. So if you wanted to go swimming in it and you've got too much E. coli, it gets red. Or if you wanted to use it for irrigation and it has too much copper, it goes red. And then the lakes are the dots. And so it's the same idea. If there's too many nutrients or too much sedimentation, it goes red. That's an impaired water body. All the green lines and green dots mean that they meet their standards. They're good. The green is good, right? Green go, red stop. And then the blue does not just mean water. The blue lines are all those, and dots are all those water bodies that we just don't have enough information to say, is it good or is it bad? A lot of that comes back to how many times you can sample a water body. Sometimes you see that it's these little lines on here, the little streams, the tributaries that are coming into the bigger ones. So those are not necessarily able to get as much data collected on them. But basically, you'll see that we have this hodgepodge mix of red and green. Sometimes a stream will go from green to red to green again. And it just depends on what pollutant we find in the streams and lakes. So the most common lake impairments that we have are nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, fish consumption, which goes back to not only non-point source from water bringing in pollutants, but also deposition from the air. Chlorophyll A basically means that there's too much green stuff in the water. There's lots of things growing that we don't need in there. High pH is fairly self-explanatory. Low dissolved oxygen results in issues with fish, especially, and the other microbiota within the system, and then bacteria. And bacteria is number 6 on the list of how frequently it occurs. But number 6 on the list also actually means it probably has the most economic and impact to us as far as public beaches are concerned. But I'll touch on that in a minute. And then for streams, it's a similar list. We don't have nutrients as a criteria for streams. And what that means is that you could have as much nitrogen or phosphorus in the stream as you want. And we don't have a number that says this is good or this is bad. It's just not something that we have a number for. So you will never see a stream in Nebraska impaired for those things. But bacteria is the most common thing that streams are impaired for in the state. Aquatic community is the second most common. And typically that relates back to erosion going on both above the stream and in the stream. So, I'm from Eastern Nebraska and we see a lot of these streams that are really deeply in size. And those are probably ones that we're seeing some aquatic community issues with. Atrazine is also very common. And when we look at things that we can impair and unimpair for, atrazine is actually one of those that is more common, not common, but more common that we could improve the water for. Fish consumption again, and low dissolved oxygen again. So that's the surface water in a nutshell in Nebraska. Now, if we switch to groundwater quality monitoring gets quite a bit more convoluted in the part about who is doing the monitoring. So surface water quality monitoring is really primarily done by the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, with some assistance and some leadership from things like the NRDs and some other agency partners. But when we get to groundwater quality monitoring, there's a lot of people involved. So in Nebraska, we have over 96,000 irrigation wells. We are a state that is rich in groundwater. Approximately 85% of our population uses groundwater for drinking water. And MUD, which serves Omaha, if you took that portion out, that number goes to nearly 100%. And basically all of rural Nebraska is using groundwater for drinking water. And so on that note, we have 31,000 registered domestic wells in the state. Basically in 1993, the Department of Natural Resources started requiring registration of domestic wells. And so that captures everything that was put in to serve a household since 1993. So there's probably thousands more wells out there that we don't know about. But we've got at least those that are registered. And then we've got all these other wells throughout the state. So we are a significantly water-rich state when it comes to groundwater. So who monitors for it? Lots of different agencies, natural resources districts, which are divided on some watershed borders and doing management, most of the local water management throughout the state. Department of Agriculture is monitoring for groundwater quality, primarily where it relates to pesticides. Department of Environment and Energy is involved again. Department of Health and Human Service and public water suppliers are both primarily looking at public drinking water supply. So when I say domestic wells earlier, that means those private wells that are drilled to give you water to an individual household, where public water supplies are serving these small communities, large communities, groups of 25 residents or more, but it's that public entity. And then UNL is monitoring for groundwater quality primarily through our Conservation Survey Division and USGS as well. So all these people monitor for groundwater quality. And in that, there is one system that we developed, which is called the Groundwater Quality Assessed Agrochemical Contaminant Database. But basically it gets all of that information together so that all of the groundwater data collected throughout the entire state is put into one home. This data is recently available to the public, so you can actually just search Nebraska Groundwater Clearinghouse. It's the short name that we're using now, and be able to get into this database and look at what's going on locally in your area. So if I dive into what it says in that groundwater quality database, it says that first off, we've been collecting groundwater quality samples in the state since 1974. There are 241 different contaminants, different pollutants that we've monitored for, and we currently have about 500,000 wells that have been monitored for. They go in a wide range of wells, and in the recent years, in the past decade, we've really in Nebraska stepped up the number of groundwater monitoring wells that we have in place that are specifically there to watch for water quality issues. So this is the results of groundwater quality monitoring in the state of Nebraska. If I looked from 1974 to today, and there are 241 different contaminants, there are only 12 of those contaminants that show up in this groundwater quality clearinghouse more than 50 times. So these 12 things that you see here are the only ones out of all the things that we've ever monitored for that show up more than 50 times. And you'll see that the couple at the bottom barely break that threshold. I have these names over to the side. And so if there's any producers or any chemical appliers on here, it's just regarding what chemicals, what trade names that those go by. But you'll notice that nitrate by far and away is the thing that is most commonly detected in our groundwater throughout the state of Nebraska. Following that, it is agrochemicals. So to dive into nitrate just a little bit more, statewide, it's hard to get a real number for this because we have so many different groundwater aquifers. But statewide, we do have an increasing trend for nitrate over the last 20 years. And if I took it back to 1974, it would be a much steeper slope with a much quicker increase overall. But really, I just kind of wanted to give you a snapshot. It's increasing, not quickly, but it is increasing. So this is what I'm showing you here are the most recently recorded nitrate samples, concentrations that were taken in a little over 18,000 wells from 2021 to 2020. And where I'm going to start here is that the safe drinking water limit that's been established is 10 parts per million. So anything you see on here that is orange on down to green is effectively considered under the safe drinking water limit. Anything that's pink or purple is exceeding that. And then we start to have some real issues. So all these stats are kind of hard to read in this mixed mesh. And I'll tell you that fuzzy yellow part, I don't know why it's fuzzy yellow there. That's the sandhills, and we really don't have a lot, nearly the significance of nitrate issues in that area of the state. But what you'll see here is those same median concentrations of nitrate. Now we're looking at it by township. So each one of these little squares on this map is a township in Nebraska. And I know that some of you are thinking about your plat map and they're not a perfect square, but this is very close to what you would see in your specific area. So in this case, what you can see is that there are significant areas of the state that have high nitrate levels that really cause some concern where it comes to health and humans. And the only other thing that I'll say here, I'm not going to go into the details of what this is called, but nitrate is one of those things that when it gets washed off the ground and goes into surface water, like a lake or a stream, it is immediately there. It's in the water. You see that concentration, and it's going to be mixed up and mobile in there. When nitrate goes into the groundwater, meaning that it's leached, it gets pushed down from where the plants can use it, because nitrate is a valuable source of food for plants, but it gets pushed down from where the plants can use it into this thing called the vadosome, the area where there's no roots, but it's above the groundwater table. When it gets pushed there, it sits there for a little bit until more water pushes it down. And then it might sit there for a little bit more until more water pushes it down. So what we find is that there is a lot of nitrate that is sitting in this area above our groundwater table that the plants aren't going to use and will eventually make it into the groundwater. So we watch that as far as seeing not only what the current state of our groundwater quality is, but what we expect the future state of the groundwater quality to be. So if I take that groundwater quality data related to nitrate and I put it on a map looking at our public water supplies. So remember, these are all the public water supplies across the state of Nebraska. It includes small communities like a Dwight or a Humphrey. It includes MUD and Omaha. It includes Lincoln, Grand Island. It includes any community that has a public water supply. And to date, there's a little under 550 of those. It kind of has had a little bit of flux in the recent years. But what you'll see here is anything on here with a pink hexagon. That's kind of a funny one. Basically, that means that it's on an administrative order and they have to do something about their water quality in relation to nitrate. The stars on here all mean that they have to do quarterly, extra quarterly sampling relating to nitrate because they have some sort of nitrate issues. Typically, it's a trigger of 5 parts per million. So once it gets above that, or once and shows some increasing trends, then they have to start monitoring for those. And anything with red on here is already a community that is treating for high nitrate concentrations. So basically what you're looking at is somewhere around 20%, a little bit less, around that 20% mark of communities throughout Nebraska have significant nitrate issues that are not only posing a potential health hazard, but also causing and posing a potential community vitalities or economic implication. What a perfect time to transition here. So that is the state of Nebraska's water quality, right? We divided up into surface water quality and groundwater quality, and we primarily monitor for things that seem to be non-point source pollution. So if I take a look a little bit more, we're going to go back to surface water quality. When we talk about nutrients in our lakes and our ponds, we really are thinking about some of the same kinds of problems. One is this over excessive growth of aquatic vegetation, right? You've seen the cattails that take over an entire pond. On the top right is duckweed, and there's a lot of those bright green ponds throughout the summer. And the reason that we get those is not only the seed bank that is deposited, but also those high nutrient levels that we have in our surface water throughout Nebraska. Nutrients also cause something called, or can be a portion of the cause of something called harmful algal blooms or toxic blue-green algae. And if you ever see it, it's pretty unmistakable. It looks like blue-green, maybe John Deere green paint floating on top of the water. And this is something that you should absolutely not have any contact with, and definitely do not allow your animals to ingest it. But basically what happens is that you'll see it a lot around the edge of the water or maybe the coves, but once that dissipates, or once an animal goes in and gets that blue-green algae on them, they come out of the water, and if they're a small dog or, you know, they can lick themselves clean. And once they pop that little vessel open, a toxin is released, and that's when we really get into issues. So for humans, if you're in that water, it's likely just going to cause you skin irritation, but it can also have some major long-term implications from being around it. But for small animals, because of their size and the toxicity level, it can cause very quick death, liver failure. It's a very significant issue. We used to see it only in the southern parts of the US, but over the years that it has been moving into Nebraska more and more frequently. And as a result, we do have beaches in Nebraska that can be closed due to harmful algal blooms. And so you're not allowed to take a boat in, you're not allowed to go fishing, and you're not allowed to any of those primary full body contact type activities. Now, the other thing that causes a lot of our beaches in Nebraska to be closed, and probably more commonly results in closure, is E. coli levels. E. coli is naturally occurring in the environment, but it also, it comes from the waste of a warm-blooded animal. So whether it's a human or a cow or a deer, there's E. coli in our waste. Once it gets on the ground and water moves over it, the water can take that E. coli into our surface water bodies. Now, when we close beaches due to E. coli or harmful algal blooms, there is always an economic impact to the people that are running that beach, let alone the impacts to all the individuals that are looking to use that water body. And then dissolved oxygen is the other one that I wanted to touch on for surface water implications. The quickest way that we see dissolved oxygen problems in the state is we'll see them in fish kills, and typically DO or dissolved oxygen results in the larger fish dying first because they are more susceptible to those small changes in oxygen levels. So it's one of those things that's very visible, but it can also change very quickly, especially in Nebraska. It changes after cloudy days or after sunny days. It changes when there's wind and when there's no wind, and it changes with the seasons. Basically, we have this thing where the lakes separate their nutrients, and then when we have these changing seasons and changing winds, it mixes things up, and that's when we get problems like low dissolved oxygen. All right. The things we just talked about as far as surface water implications are fairly straightforward, fairly well known. Harmful algal blooms are still on kind of the cutting edge of research. The northern states have had some problems with those because they use some surface water intakes. And when you have HABs, harmful algal blooms, in your surface water that goes to drinking water, that creates a whole host of problems that we don't have to deal with here. However, when we start talking groundwater quality implications, we have a lot of those in Nebraska, especially as it relates to nitrate in health and agrochemicals in health. So I mentioned this earlier, the safe drinking water standard for nitrate is 10 parts per million, right? Nitrate in and of itself can be both positive and negative. Basically what happens is when we have excessive nitrate inputs, so there's some sort of excess out there, whether it's coming in for humans if we're drinking it through our groundwater, or whether we're eating it, only in this time it would be like the form of nitrite. So like if you're eating a lot of processed food, it ends up changing into the same formats. And so once you get these nitrogen inputs into our bodies and you put them in an acidic environment like our stomach, then we start having some quick health impacts. So we have some Protective actions, things that actually nitrates do a good job at. They're antimicrobial, they aid in heart development. They can actually decrease blood pressure. You think about your blood pressure medication, and those are the things that can actually have positive impacts from nitrate. Now we get into the ones that get a little bit shaky. You can have some alteration of nerve activity. This is one that can go both ways. It can be positive or negative depending on what other things you've got going on in a human health system. It can be carcinogenic. And this one, we talk about studies in humans that are, they're after the fact, right? You aren't studying typically someone for cancer if they don't have cancer based only on their risk factors. Now that's changing, but what we're seeing is that nitrate itself has carcinogenic effects, and when nitrate is combined with some of our agrochemicals, then it multiplies, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. Hemoglobinemia is really the first thing. It's also called blue baby syndrome, but blue baby syndrome is the first thing that caused us to look at nitrate in drinking water. And it's the reason that we have that 10 parts per million standard, is that is the level that once it gets into a baby's system will cause them to not have enough oxygen in their body. And so what happens is that the blood should be carrying oxygen, and where there should be oxygen, instead the nitrate takes a different form and takes the spot of the oxygen. So the oxygen might still be there, but if it can't connect to the blood cell, then the baby suffocates. And we talk about this as blue baby syndrome because it's primarily in babies, but it also affects pregnant women because the way they, because of the changes that go on in the body. It actually affects the women, not just the infants. And then it affects those that are immunocompromised and those that have oxygen transport problems. And it really affects others as well, but those are the ones that are most at risk. And then the final thing about nitrate, and these are all on the negative, is that hormone disruption. And if you'll remember, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of talk about hormone disruption from nitrite because of processed foods like hot dogs and hams. And it's the same kind of concept, because once it gets into our body, it has its own nitrogen cycle and things just change. So this is where it gets a little bit scary, or a little bit interesting, depending on how you want to look at it. But basically, when we look at high concentrations of nitrate in drinking water, we have some very strong links that have been developed. And this research to these links between nitrate and health outcomes is all being led by the University of Nebraska Medical Center, UNMC, and they have a program called the Water Climate Health Program. But they are really leading the charge on doing this evaluation of nitrate and health, both in Nebraska, but with a national leadership as well. So the strongest links we have, hemoglobinemia, we've known that one for decades upon decades. Colorectal cancer, you'll see these numbers look kind of small, but it's 5 studies in Nebraska. Thyroid disease, 3 studies in Nebraska, and then neural tube defects. And I want to remind you at this point that I am an engineer and I like numbers. When we start talking health, it gets a little bit squishy for me. Neural tube defects are birth defects, and you got to think things like spina bifida, spinal cord change, things along those lines. So those were the most common, strongest links that we have. Those are the ones that they would say have definite effects on the health outcomes. Other health links with nitrate are becoming stronger, but we're really only on the cutting edge of the research relating to these implications. One of them, the very first one, is kind of like a generic version of health things that might not be feeling right. So increased heart rate, nausea, headaches, and abdominal cramps. All of those things in combination have been linked to nitrate in drinking water. The other thing that's being linked is some of these other cancers, pediatric brain cancers, kidney cancers, bladder cancers. Those are all the ones that are starting to look like they have a correlation between that nitrate in drinking water and health. The other ones are non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And if you look at our rate in Nebraska, we are have a much higher rate than the national average for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we have similarly a higher rate of Alzheimer's, diabetes, and Parkinson's disease. So I'm going to keep this part a little brief because I want to keep us going here. But this is a map that basically is showing the birth defects per 10,000 live births. Now, the dark purple means there's more, and the white means that there were no birth defects. What we have to understand here, that this is basically normalized on a per capita basis. But if you had one positive incidence in Cherry County, that shade could change from blue to purple in a heartbeat, whereas one positive incidence in Lancaster County is going to take a longer period of time to change things. But the first two numbers are the ones I want you to take a look at here. On average, our national birth defect rate nationally is 3.3%. In Nebraska, from 2018 to 2017, that was 7.9%. We have counties in several parts of Nebraska that reach that 9 to 12%. The counties with the higher birth defects also have a higher prevalence of nitrogen and agrochemicals in the water. And regardless of how close the data is to proving or disproving any sorts of theories, it is a stark realization to see that Nebraska's birth outcome, birth defect rate is so much higher than our national average. One of the other links that we're showing between drinking water nitrate and health outcomes is miscarriage. Now, if you're familiar with miscarriage at all, you'll understand that many of the miscarriages are not reported, especially in the early stages. So it's hard to get a true understanding of what that number is and how that relates. But there is one study from 1996. Basically in the mid-90s, there was this cluster of spontaneous abortions in rural Indiana. And the doctors are the ones that actually that picked up on this because they were ones that were being reported. And they primarily related it in this cluster of area back to high nitrate concentrations in drinking water. And when they switched their population to low nitrate water, the result was these healthy births. And then the other thing is I noted these two, Spina Bifida and Anacephaly. These are both those neural tube defects, and those were the most common birth defects in the area of that same time. So they recognized the issue and made changes at the local level very quickly, but they are only now starting to truly evaluate again this information in the study relating to this time period here in this one area of Indiana. So the most vulnerable populations, who is most at risk for nitrate and health implications? The first one is young infants. That's that blue baby syndrome. The second one is pregnant women and their fetus, both of them. The third is people with oxygen transport issues. And then also people who have high nitrite diets because they already have a significant nitrogen intake. Having that additional high nitrate water quality for drinking water can play a big role in their health outcomes. This is one that's interesting. And this is UNMC that has shared this. Usually being go big red is a wonderful thing. But what you'll see on here is that the 5 red states here are the 5 states in the nation that have the highest rates of pediatric cancer. And UNMC research is relating much of that back to our nitrate concentrations in drinking water, and the prevalence of agrochemicals. If I take a look more closely at Nebraska, and I look at it based on a county basis, oops, I don't know where that went. So if I took a look at it based on a county basis, we parse out pediatric cancer, all of it, and then we specifically look at pediatric brain tumors, because that's one of those neural tube defects that we're looking at. And you'll see that the rates tend to be in Northeast Nebraska, and then kind of there along the southern border of the edge here. So I'm skipping through this because what I'm going to look at here is these two maps. The one on the left is an agrochemical. It's atrazine. So these are places where we show incidence of atrazine in our drinking water in these wells. On the right, it shows nitrate in our drinking water. If I put those two maps together, there's certain areas that have significant clusters of positive wells. I'm using UNMC's language here to be as correct as we can get here. But you'll see that there are these clusters of positive wells. And if you take that map on the left and look at it as it compares to where the counties with the highest incidence of the pediatric cancer and pediatric brain tumors are, they have a tendency to generally overlap, although that is not the case in a couple of counties on the south border. So there's a lot of information there on the implications of our groundwater quality. The surface water quality implications are, again, pretty straightforward because of the way we use surface water in Nebraska. The groundwater implications are really only beginning to be understood because of this out of sight, out of mind kind of thing that we have going on with groundwater. And you can read the summary here for yourself, but it'll be interesting to see how this UNMC data comes out, how the water climate health program progresses in the future, and if you have any interest in the implications of water quality and health, this is the group to watch in the coming years. All right, and I'm going to end the implications part with a very much more clean cut, straightforward implication. When we talk about water quality, water is essential not only to agriculture in this state, it's essential to drinking, but it's also essential to our community vitality. We'll notice that the amount of communities that can be supported, that have businesses, that have schools, is directly related to the ability to provide a potable or drinkable water supply. So as part of that, when you have an existing drinking water system that has high nitrate, you come into a few different options. Communities can drill a new well. They can look for a new water source and hope that they find something that has better water quality. There's a cost to that. A community like the one I'm sitting in here in Seward can choose to treat their water. They can put in a reverse osmosis system. They have a few different treatment options. There is a significant cost to that as well. Small communities don't typically have the financial capability to treat their drinking water. And by small communities, I might mean someone like a 250, 300 person town. So typically, if they're not going to drill a new well and they're not going to install a community drinking water treatment system, they have two options left. One is to install a point of use system, which is like those RO systems that people put under their sinks where they're going to drink the water. And the other option is to tie into another existing community drinking water system, which comes with its own significant costs. So not only do we have vitality implications of water quality, we have financial implications, we have health implications, and they can be both good and bad. But in the case of nitrate, we're talking about some significant costs. So it's not all doom and gloom. That's what I want to wrap you guys up with. It is not all doom and gloom in Nebraska. I had someone say to me, and this is a researcher, so they're a little bit more interested in this than the common person, but we have this really unique opportunity where we have this huge set of data of water quality information, and we have a population that is fairly stationary, meaning that they've been, once they settle in a given community or given area, there's a significant number that stay in one spot. So we have this great opportunity to do a lot of exciting research and be a leader in managing water quality in the nation. So how do we manage it right now in Nebraska? We have several different entities that are involved in the management of water quality. On the right side, you'll see all of the people involved with surface and groundwater quality. And interestingly, in the state, we work well together. These agencies, these entities work well together. They research, they partner well. That's not to be said across the entire nation. So it's a really positive way to go in Nebraska. Oops. Every community in Nebraska has something called a wellhead protection area. And basically what a wellhead protection area, I've shown it in one area here. This is the Creighton area, West Knox, Rural Water District, if you're up in Northeast Nebraska. All of those little red lines are considered wellhead protection areas. And basically what it is, if you look at this map, all the black dots here show where the wells are for the city of York in this case. The big fat red line goes all the way around those dots, and the red and blue lines that are swooshing in from the top left to the right, that is where all the water is coming from for the 20-year period to get to those wells. So what that means is that that red line around the outside circles all the land where all of the groundwater is coming from to get to those wells in the next 20 years. And actually in this case, it's in the next 50 years. So every community public water system in Nebraska has these available or has these wellhead protection areas. And in these wellhead protection areas, there is the opportunity to provide cost incentives to farmers and producers to help improve water quality. There's the ability to understand where that water quality is coming from. And there are some really cool education and producer-driven solutions that are being looked at in these areas. We also have in Nebraska the natural resources districts. And if you're not familiar with those, this could be a full 1 hour, 1 day sort of presentation on its own. But the natural resources districts are local districts that are run by a local board of directors. So you elect those people and they make decisions not only on your water, but on a whole host of other environmental things, from soil to water quantity, to water usage. And these are actually, the system that we have in Nebraska was put in place in the 70s, and it is one of the most sought after systems internationally. So we have people from all around the world that come here to explore how we manage our natural resources. And each of these NRDs manages water quality a little bit differently. I could go through one by one and make comparisons for you, but the reason they manage it differently is because the land is different in each of those areas. The people that work the land in those areas is different in each local district, and the people that use the resources are different. And so this system allows them to meet the local needs. We also have something called water quality management plans. And so what you see here in color is all the places across the state where we have water quality management plans. The stars and the circled star are what we call drinking water protection plans. And so those go a step above and beyond what we talked about in the wellhead protection area. And they really target specific actions to protect and improve water quality in those areas. And then all of these water quality, the bigger shapes that are on this map, all of those areas are also specifically addressing the most priority water quality problems in the most priority areas with the practices and approaches that will work best locally. And then they have financial support. These are financial support from both the state of Nebraska through the DEE, or federally through several different systems. This is a cool action. And this is, I put federally, but basically in 2018 Farm Bill, we had this, there was a designation that required a certain amount of conservation practices to be directed in water quality priority areas for drinking water. So 10% of all of these conservation practices have to be in drinking water priority areas. And for us in Nebraska, that means groundwater. And what happened in this state, it's administered by the NRCS, but what happened in this state is that the NRCS led the charge with like 10 different entities and a series of experts to identify all of the priority areas, all of those red dots and circles across areas we talked about. But we've got these other more specific designations on here as well. But here, it really gives an advantage to these areas to really take care of and improve water quality. This one's a big map nationally. Another federal program is something called the National Water Quality Initiative. We actually have 4 of those in the state, which is as many as any state in the country except for Utah, I believe, Utah and Tennessee. And they, again, have provided an opportunity to combine some cost share with some water quality actions. And then again, back at the local level, the NRDs are creating different phased areas, and they work locally on what works best. So I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't get to some of these cool projects, but I will wrap up here because I want to give a couple minutes for questions. Nebraska water quality is extremely complicated, especially when you take it into groundwater where you can't see what's going on, and it's hard to have a comprehensive look or visual to go along with what the water quality is. So with that, thank you all very much. And let's take a look at some of these questions. And you said they're all by chat. We're not by microphone, right?
Yes, all of our questions are in the Q&A.
Awesome. Okay, so the first one I see is from Mary, and it says, how long has UNMC been doing research on water in Nebraska, and what initiated their interest in it? That's a cool question. So some of the researchers have, so first off, they've been researching it for about 10 years. And they started very small and very individual researcher based. And they started looking at it basically because we had these 2 pools of really good information, big data type information from water quality, and some big data health information, especially as it's relating to pediatrics. And then here in late 2019, there was an endowment to create this water climate health program at UNMC. And so now here they had a little bit of a giddy up, slowish start in 2020, as everyone did. But here in the last, they continued doing research, and here in the last couple of years, they've really taken off on what and how they're going to be doing research. So they have a significant funding line to support the research they're doing, and significant support from a lot of different partners, both financial, technical, and educational. Lori asked, has the rate of increase of nitrate and groundwater slowed since the 1970s? So complex answer. In certain parts of the state, we have actually improved nitrate concentrations, so they've decreased. That happens most easily where the water table is shallow, so it's shallow groundwater, and we have sandy soils, so the nitrate moves more quickly, so we can actually see solutions more quickly. So especially in like the Central Platte, NRD, Central Platte area, they've seen improvements in nitrate concentrations, which is awesome. But in other parts of the state, what's happening is that we do have some legacy nitrate. It's hanging out in that vadose zone and it's slowly moving through. So we don't actually expect to see improvements in concentrations in certain areas of the state for several years, even when we're doing the best practices we can on the ground. So sometimes we can see really quick and good responses, and other times it's just a long grudge to make some of the improvements we need. Anonymous attendee says, does boiling water before you drink it lower the nitrate content? Actually, boiling water that has high nitrate concentration actually makes that concentration higher because the nitrate stays there and some of the water comes off. So whereas boiling water for E. coli is a good practice, when we're boiling, we do not boil water for nitrate concentrations. Mary, thank you. Let's talk. I'll tell you all about some cool projects. And Martin says, are there a stream or river water which supply water in Nebraska? So when we go over into eastern Nebraska and we start looking at the Platte River, we have several different wells which are pulling water from that system. We also have water that's pulling, or wells that are pulling water from the Missouri River system. And so yes, we do. We also have groundwater in Nebraska where we have groundwater wells that are drilled and they're actually under the influence of surface water. So whatever's going on in the surface water makes its way pretty quickly into the groundwater system. And so even those are technically groundwater wells, they're also groundwater under the influence of surface water. I have some really cool people that are fun to talk to about this. Let's see. Mary asks, do you find that producers are open to changing practices when problems are increasing? Absolutely. And you know, it's people, right? And I would say the hardest part of what I do is work with people. The easiest part is look at the science of things. But there are so many barriers to adoption of some of the practices that can improve our situation where it relates to water quality, that it's much more complicated than do producers want to do it? Because I would say 98% of producers want to change their practices to protect water quality. And we actually do lots of human dimensions research in the last 5 years on, are producers interested in protecting water quality and other facets of the environment, and what is holding them back? But so often our system in agriculture is so ingrained in a whole variety of things that it's hard for producers to make some of the bigger impact switches quickly. It just takes time. But are they open to changing practices? I would say most of the time they really are, and they are even suggesting those practices before it becomes widely incentivized. And I think this is probably the final.
Hold on, Katie, real quick. There are a couple questions also in the chat.
Oh, I thought I was in the chat. I'm in the Q&A. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll do this last one on Q&A, and then there's 2 in the chat. Is bottled water free of nitrates? I know we discouraged this, but wondered about it. The answer is yes, because most often bottled water, and Becky Sherman's on here, so if I'm wrong, she's gonna answer it for me in the chat box. But most often our bottled water is coming from a public drinking water source, and those or a source that is sampled for. And we do have to, in a public drinking water source, make sure that we are providing safe drinking water to all of the people in the community. So you could go to like a Super Saver or Hy-Vee and fill up your bottles with water, and you will get the same quality of water that the city is providing, which is a safe quality of water. Oh, Tom, I'm gonna have to meet you because I think you're throwing me under a bus here. The question is, any comments on the spill in Mead? And the short answer is no. And the long answer is yes, but we have not enough time for that. If you are not familiar with Mead, they have a whole host of issues going on that's much more complex than simply our nitrate contamination or agrochemical use. It's related to how treated seed has been processed, stored, used, and it's very complex. So Tom, I can get you in touch with the right people that are much more informed about Mead than me. So if that is something you want, I am happy to do that. And I can have a conversation with you offline, but there are people that know much more about what's going on over there. And final question, Kathleen. Hi, Katie, can I contact you on your email about doing some networking and projects? I love networking and I love projects. So absolutely, I would love that. And if anyone else is interested, please let me know. I've got a little bit of a busy patch here for about the next week that might delay my response, but I will get back to you as soon as I can. So I think did I catch them all?
Yep, I think we answered all of the questions. Oh, we have one more just pop up in the chat.
Awesome. Oh, it's Becky Sherman. She is she works in extension out of the Lancaster County office, but she works statewide, and she is our drinking water guru as well as wastewater. So a lot of things we bat around, and I go back and forth with her. She says there is a small, yes, this is correct. There's a small amount of nitrate in bottled water. Often if a grocery store has a bottle refill station, it is from a public water system. So that means it's either been put through an RO system or it has already been tested to make sure that it doesn't have the high nitrate levels. And so when I said that bottled water doesn't have nitrate, what I should have said is that bottled water has nitrate levels below the safe drinking water standard of 10 parts per million. Thank you, Becky.
All right, so real quick before everyone leaves, I am going to send out the quick poll that I mentioned earlier. It's 3 questions. It'll only take about a minute, and it just gives us some feedback about our webinars. All right, you should go ahead and start seeing that pop up on your screens. All right, and then I just want to go ahead and thank Katie for taking time out of your day to help talk to us about our water quality. It was really interesting. All the maps, very cool. I also like maps. That's all good.
While you're answering the survey, Mary asked if there were incentives beneficial to helping some of the barriers to cheating practices. Lots of incentives are out there from NRDs, from NRCS, from other local entities, from Pheasants Forever. There are lots and lots of incentives out there.
Cool. All right, so you guys can go ahead and keep answering the poll. Thank you everyone for attending today. I hope you all found it informative and educational. If you guys would like, you can go ahead and check out our website or our Facebook page to see any more events that we have coming up in the near future, or if you just want more information about stuff that we have going on. A couple of you asked, but yes, this recording will be posted to Conservation Nebraska's YouTube page in a few weeks. It will also be on our website. So once again, thank you, Katie. Thank you everyone for being here. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thanks. I had fun. I hope someday I'll get to see you guys in person.
Hopefully.